Okay, so today I'm on the air with Secular Hawk, a relatively left-wing person, as I understand it, from America, and we're going to talk about politics. So, Hawk, it's a pleasure having you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. So,
Excellent. Um, so, as I understand it, Hawk, you're somewhat of an advocate for capitalism, which I thought would be a good place to start in regards to our conversation.
yeah, to some extent. I,
So,
I,
what would you see as being, where you want, or what would it be that you advocate for? Because obviously, it's quite a broad area, just saying capitalism. But what specifically do you see as what you support?
well, I support more of a social democratic system with like capitalism, but with a very strong welfare state, somewhat like socialistic elements.
Um, okay, and what do you mean by socialistic elements? You mean like the welfare state and stuff? And
Yeah, I mean like the welfare state and like high taxes on the rich. I'm not like a full supporter of capitalism too. I don't think that like everyone trying to acquire capital is necessarily good for society. So I think like I'm willing to consider like ideas like a maximum income tax and things like that.
okay, interesting ideas. Um, so now, could you tell me what you understand capitalism to be?
Like a system with free markets and private ownership of businesses. And
So yeah, private ownership, free, the ability to freely accrue profits however you see fit, making profit, private ownership of industry and stuff,
yeah,
all that sort of stuff. Okay, so and as you're aware, the idea of free markets is the idea that there's no limit, there's no regulation or imposed barrier to how you, as the capitalist, can accumulate profit.
yeah, I'm not
Correct?
like necessarily for a fully free market with
Oh,
no
of course.
regulations at all. So,
Of course, no, it'd be pretty silly. However, do you think that the idea of taxing the wealthy and having a welfare state is somewhat contradicted by the accumulation of said profit, and the accumulation of capital and stuff, and holding a lot of resources for yourself?
I don't necessarily think so. I think you can have a system where people can own their own businesses and try and gain money as much as they want, but also like have a welfare state and regulations and stuff to protect the working class and consumers. And
But what I mean to say is, if you're a wealthy, capitalist, someone with a lot of money who wants to, um, with existing money, make more money, um, paying high taxes and having a welfare state to have to provide for others, is that not going to cut into said capital and subsequently um, not serve the interest of accumulating more capital?
yeah, I think so. I think it can definitely like it's not in like the wealthiest person's best interest to have high taxes and regulations and all that, but I think they're good for the collective.
I'm sure they are good for the collective, but as in the system of capitalism, the collective is not what matters. It's about your personal capital. It's your private property. You, the individual, making more with what you have. So, having said all this, the wealthy are going to use their power and their capital to try and protect their capital and trying to avoid, having a system that has high taxes and regulation and a strong welfare state. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's why I support like strong like campaign finance regulation and things like that to prevent that from happening.
Oh, of course. No, I'm well aware that you support a lot of regulation and stuff for the system, But that doesn't change how the people with said wealth are going to do what they can to undermine it. For
Yeah.
instance,
I just want to limit like the ways that they can undermine it. Like I want to limit like the way that they can like basically bribe politicians in
of
America
course,
and things like that.
of course, but the capital that exists in society, um, that's not just going to go away just for politics. If you have a system
Yeah,
that
no.
is quite fundamentally based upon the accumulation of capital, then wealthy people are always going to have a massive advantage in society and politics and economics because of their higher amount of capital. Um, and to expect them to just sort of not have that advantage is a little bit naive, in my opinion. You look at putting in financial limits on campaigning. Um, well, how are you going to get that through a government in the first place that's already got said financial tiering? What major party can get that through? Which is, even if you do put those limits in, you still have the bureaucracy of the individual parties who are all, set up to preserve the status quo, preserve the capital of the wealthy. Said progress is going to be, minimal at best, and also ignores the fact that, you know, it's one thing to have fairer campaign regulations, but it's another thing to then topple a system with parties, with only a handful of parties having any chance of winning said election, of gaining the onus, the potential to change the political figure of things, to make corporations and welfare and stuff fairer.
I think that that's correct. I just think that there are. I don't necessarily think like a sort of socialistic system would necessarily like. I don't know if how feasible that type of system, like especially in an anarchic. Wow, it's hard to say. But I don't know if an anarchic system could, you know, be viable. And
But regardless of that, for the moment, that doesn't change that the situation at present in the world right now is that capital and wealth of the extreme wealthy and wealthy in general is presiding over logic and reason and fairness.
yeah, I
We're
agree with
seeing
that.
exactly, but then at the same time, you still support the capitalist system, which for all you have these caveats for how you want to sort of impede it. Ultimately, you support the system that enables it in the first place, that creates the wealth inequality, which sees the colossal amounts of poverty despite the existence of the capitalist system around it and stuff, and the wealth and stuff. And it's great that you recognize that just pure um, capitalism is a pretty bad idea. Obviously, social democracy is still better than just more libertarian leaning right wing capitalism. However, having said that, though, it is still capitalism, and it can't be the extent or the limit of progress. To look at that in that way is to essentially just put a plaster over a massive like gaping wound. Yeah, sure, that plaster might help it for a bit, but it's going to peel off eventually, and just going to be left with the wound. That wound is capitalism, and there's only so long you can have a welfare state, um, high taxes, lots of regulations before the need to accumulate more capital, the desires of the capitalist class to make more, or even just to preserve their existing capital, that takes over. So, for instance, in the social democracies of Europe, we're currently seeing, lots of things shift more to the right. So, for instance, in the UK, over the last few decades, we've had our welfare system cut. We've had our NHS cut funding. We've had lots of privatization. Taxes on corporations have massively gone down to the point where we're the lowest in Europe, I think, for corporate tax. And the result of that is, despite the fact our GDP has gone up and our economy is one of the biggest in the world, we have massive wealth inequality. We have more and more people every year needing food banks and shelters to survive. We've got people, more and more homeless people every single year, despite the fact that we've got this social democracy, we've got this system in place to help people. It's been cut and is ultimately decaying because the capitalist system is fundamentally set up to serve capital, not people. And the fact that there's sort of plasters and bandages around that doesn't change the fact that the system at core is the problem.
I don't necessarily agree that like all European social democracies have kind of moved to a more right wing system. I think like Denmark is one of the most stable governments in Europe, and it's also one of the most thriving social democracies and least corrupt. So,
well, that's true. There's it's less corrupt and it's less bad, but less does not mean not at all. And you'll actually find that in said Scandinavian countries there is still a rising right wing and far right movement. In fact, I believe the current leader of Denmark does belong to a centre right or right wing party. Now, obviously, those countries are well ahead of the curve. They're well, into the point where things like healthcare, housing are, protected rights. But at the same time, that doesn't change that there are still those problems that are caused by a capitalist system. They still have homelessness, they still have poverty. It's just not as bad as in other countries. But the thing with capitalism is it's not, it's not you can't have continuous growth without, a reaction at the other end. You can't just have everyone getting wealthier and not have a consequence to that. And subsequently, you're going to see people at the bottom end of society increasingly get worse and worse off to
I don't think I don't think
the wealth of the top. What are you going to say,
yeah,
sorry?
I don't think I agree with that. That like capitalism necessarily makes people poorer or more exploited because it like the global amount of people living in poverty over the past just hundreds of years has been declining. Even in just recent years, the amount of people living in poverty has been declining worldwide.
Okay, so yeah, it's true. There's been progress, but how is that for capitalism and not workers? Remember, like, capitalism is not a system of, oh, well, let's make something. It's the system of distribution. It's the system of commodification. It's the system that essentially says, your labor is my commodity. I am going to take your labor and sell it on for more. I'm going to make more than what you have done with this, essentially. Um, so, for instance, the people who have improved society, they are workers. They're people who have made better houses, better technology, improved food quality, made it possible to have clean drinking water and stuff. Capitalism really distributes the produce of that, of the innovation, to the capitalists, the landowners, the business owners, the industry owners, and subsequently, despite all these technological progresses, we still have hunger, world hunger around the world. We still have homelessness, poverty, warfare of resources, despite them all existing in abundance. We could easily feed everyone on the planet, but we don't because resources are controlled by the financial elite. And I would actually say that it has come in spite of capitalism that we've had these progresses for everyone rather than because of it. We can look at the history of the UK where, 100 years ago, maybe not 100 years ago, but like 200 years ago, children had to work, in workhouses. We had appalling labor conditions. And it took workers standing up and, fighting for their rights to win basic rights like guaranteed education, like the weekend. The weekend was won by worker movements, not by not because the boss said, "Oh, let's be nice to them." You've got to remember that human progress has come from humans, not at the interest of capital, and we do not need this system, stapled onto us.
Well, I think with specifically the the amount of people living in poverty, that's been going down partially because of capitalism. Because capitalism, what it's very good at, it's producing more goods at lower costs, and that's why like even the poorest in a lot of societies, especially like social democracies, can still survive.
Well, firstly, survival is not exactly a high bar. I mean,
I
it's
mean, and also like just not be living in poverty. Like the amount of people living in poverty has just been going down. I think that is because there's cheaper goods and people are being paid more for their labor.
that's not. Firstly, that ignores the fact that they've got a higher wage, but there's also inflation. There's also the things you need to live have increased and have um, grown over time. There's also the fact that this
Yeah, I
ignores
agree with
the
that. Uh,
yes, but
I,
this
like
ignore.
in my country, like the minimum wage is stagnated and the cost of living is skyrocketed. But I don't think that. But like I think that could be fixed if we just raise the minimum wage to like either $12 or $15. I don't think it necessarily matters which. I think 15 is probably better for cities, and 12 is probably better for rural areas. But I think if we raised the minimum wage and tied it to inflation, we could continue protecting the sort of wage growth we've had.
Well, the thing is, though, Hawk. Firstly, it comes down to the fact that why are the wealthy going to agree to do this? Why are they going to say, "Oh, our capital doesn't matter. Let's pay our workers more"? But secondly, you know, um, why should workers be given back a fraction of what they produce? Why should um, workers have to have their produce controlled by someone who has not produced it, by the bosses, the landowners? Should it not
Because
be?
they're being compensated for their work at a wage that they agreed upon.
Well, how is that compensation? Though? If you produce 1,000, £1,000 of stuff, and then a boss takes £900 of it and hands you back 100, that's not compensation. They've stolen from you.
Oh,
But essentially,
well,
and then to
no,
talk
because
about,
it's basically a contract. You've both agreed to pay that wage for this work, and
but it's not a a fair agreement, is it? Because if you don't accept that job, you haven't got an income and you can't pay for food, housing, healthcare, water, all the things you need to survive, which are also controlled by said capitalists. So the capitalist knows that you are going to agree with them, because otherwise you're not going to have a you're not going to have a living. um you know because what happens if you don't have a job? It's not.
well, we kind of have like labor unions too to make sure that workers get what they're worth as
but they
well.
but they don't get the whole thing. They don't get the entirety of their produce. They don't control their produce, and they don't get to determine the fair distribution of said produce. And even and again, unions, capitalists quite famously have always been anti-union and always fought against the freedom of workers to form unions and strike and stuff, because they know that they represent the interests of the workers against their capital. Look at to draw us back to um, stuff going on in Europe. The right in Europe have been a pretty strong anti-union movement for several decades now. Quite famously, Thatcher dealt massive blows to the unions, and subsequently was able to impose a lot of her deregulation a lot easier, subsequently making her and the wealthy a lot wealthier at the expense of the workers who had produced said wealth. Um, but coming back to the point of the workers agree to it. No one agrees to have less than what they are worth, less than what they produce. People are forced into it by the free market, the withholding of essentials of life until unless they agree to have their labor exploited by the capitalists.
I don't know if it's exploitation. I think
But it
I
is.
think that
Sorry to cut you off, Fork, but you're you're producing something and then getting less than what you produced. And if you don't do that, then you
because
die.
people wouldn't produce if they weren't. People wouldn't produce if they didn't. If it was just going to be distributed based on need, would they?
Well, that doesn't. Firstly, that doesn't. That's not correct. But secondly, how would that, even if that was true, how would that change that it's still exploitative to have a select group of people on top of society taking what other people produce by force and then handing back a morsel, a scrap of what is there.
Because
Look
the
at
people on top are the ones doing the sort of most valuable work in a way.
how
They're the
is it the
ones that
most
are kind of
valuable?
creating the companies that are that have those resources and then
That just
using it to
isn't.
create something.
That's just not true, though, is it? Because, like, I mean, for instance, the people who are manning what's the shop in America, Walmart, people on the shop floor in Walmart, the people, delivering the stock to the warehouse, making the stock in the factories, shipping it over. Are you telling me that they are somehow less valuable than just the boss who sits in an office and signs a bit of paper? To think that the CEO of
They
this
don't just
company.
like sign paper. They're the ones that are like making all the deals with the different suppliers and all of that.
But
The
they
work that
aren't, though,
provides them.
because they'll have a team underneath them doing that. The person who's making the highest salary isn't the person who's doing the work. And even if they were,
You don't
how
think
would
the
that
CEO
entice?
is just sitting there doing nothing all day, do you?
Some of them do. And lots of them do, in fact, because bosses are in a position where they can. But even if they were doing the level of work that you've described here, that wouldn't entitle them to everyone else's labor. They need everyone else's labor to even have their position. What good is it being the boss if you don't have the workers doing the work of the company? You can't ignore the fact that this whole system is based on exploitation because the boss is earning a six-figure salary, sometimes a seven-figure salary, sometimes even more. Look at what Amazon's boss makes. But who is producing the value? It's the workers. Yet the workers have to barely survive on minimum wage whilst the boss makes a lucrative salary. And
Well, the
that's not even
boss is the one that
considering.
created the company, and they're the one that like that brings it value and
Well, again,
does the business decisions that make it profitable.
That firstly ignores the fact that most of these people have the wealth to begin with to have a position where they can actually buy a company. Secondly,
Well, that's
lots of
not
bosses.
necessarily relevant.
It is fair. Most wealth is inherited, and yeah, sure, they aren't like billionaires, but if you're like a millionaire, if you've already got wealthy parents, it's a lot easier than say just being a worker who's got a family which is on a median to low income and somehow becoming a top 500 corporate leader. People don't have, but you can't. You got the saying it is quite famously, it takes money to make money, and it's not. It's never been truer because if you don't, how are you going to just magic up the funds to start up a company? The boss that has this and created this company had the position to in the first place. It's hardly as though no one else
You
could do
don't
it.
necessarily need to have a lot of funds to create a profitable business. Like there's a lot of businesses that started out with relatively middle class or poor people just starting a business and having a good profitable idea and it blowing up from there.
Yeah, people who got lucky. And also
It's not
that
luck.
it is luck a lot of the
They
time.
had they came up with a product that people wanted, so they sold the product to people.
Well, okay, so give me an example of one of these then. It doesn't even have to be a real one, just a hypothetical of something like this happening.
Well, I think like Apple started out as Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, and they were just out of college, weren't they? So
they got into college for one, which is a priced out thing for a lot of people in
Well,
America, is it not?
a while back it wasn't as bad as it is today, but
It was still pretty expensive.
yeah, but there are ways like to get loans and stuff, which like certainly can cripple you for debt, but a lot of the times it can get you into college, which is the important part.
So that's luck to begin with. If I understand it, whilst they weren't excessively wealthy, they were still pretty well off. The two of them.
Uh, I don't remember. I think they were pretty. I think they were like middle class at the time. They weren't. Um,
Well, middle
they
class
weren't.
is quite well off, in my opinion,
Yeah,
as someone coming from a working class family. Um, it's not exactly something that's destitute. Um, but when they built these computers, who collected the materials? Um, how did they make the computers?
well, they purchased the different components that they needed, and
Oh, that's
uh,
interesting. Who produced the components that they purchased?
it depends on the suppliers and all of that. In
But
America,
what?
probably someone in like China or whatever. But
Yeah, like in southern parts of Africa and where they find this the silicon and mine it and stuff, and then workers will have shipped it over to America, and workers will have unloaded it from the ship to the docking yard, driven it on a truck to the store, and then someone will have sold it to them on the over the counter in the store. All of that labor went into this. All of that labor was needed to get the parts of the computer to America for Steve Jobs and stuff to sorry yes to get Steve Jobs and stuff to make it into a computer. So while if them making a computer is obviously a great thing, but that doesn't change the fact that to make that computer, it's more than just Steve Jobs you need. It's everyone else down the line. Um, and subsequently, the fact that they became millionaires, whilst the people who produced every step of the way before that and after that, really, um, isn't fair. That isn't fair. Without the workers in the sweatshops and the third world and stuff, the products of Apple cannot exist. Yet they get
I don't think it's true though that uh, a comp or that if a company makes a lot of money that the workers that the workers even down the line don't make more money as well because
how much money do you
that's
think?
why that's why like global poverty has been going down for years, like I've said.
Well, again, that's not. It's a misleading stat because it ignores the fact that a lot of these measures of poverty are pretty ignorant of the actual situation going on. Like it's measured on the average instead of like looking at what is actually going on in for many of these people. But sticking on the topic you were just bringing up, you know, what is the situation and life of a person living in a sweatshop or a manufacturer plant in the third world compared to the executive boards and top earners in Apple who make lucrative salaries, probably barely have to show up for work, have an entire team of people doing their jobs for them all the time, yet get millions and essentially get to chill in Silicon Valley or lie around on a super yacht.
Well, I think like the top level business decisions are being made by you know by them, the ones that are ultimately like the most consequential for the success of the company and for everyone down below. So like
But that's
if the businessman didn't make the decisions, then the people all the way down the chain wouldn't really have jobs, would they?
that's not even true though, because why do they need one person making a decision to decide everyone else's fate? Um, And even if it was as straightforward and as simple as you were saying, why would that entitle them to millions at the expense of everyone else's labor? we're ignoring the fact that without
Well,
if
it's
without
not at the
people,
expense of the other people. They benefit as well. Like,
so they benefit from being in a sweatshop earning like a few dollars an hour, whilst Mr. Apple can make 7 million a year or whatever.
I think this has a lot to do with our global trade deals, and not as much to do with like capitalism.
Why doesn't it have anything to do with capitalism? That's the whole point. It's
Well, I mean, I'm sure that like I think that the way we structure our trade deals is like it is like very free market esque. I think like we can regulate that and still maintain a capitalist system.
Well, no, because why? I mean, you could regulate it, but then you're going to make less money on, in the corporation's end because they're having to sort of treat the workers fairly and give them a better wage. I mean, let
Yeah,
alone
I mean,
how, why
my
are they going
goal
to do
isn't
this?
to just make corporations money. I also want to protect the people down the line. So.
But then you still support the system that hands them a few scrapes here and there, whilst letting the CEOs of Apple make millions off everyone else's labor. You can't tell me that there's somehow a fair way to do that because inherently it isn't fair. Imagine, like I said, take away those workers, Apple can't exist. Take away the bosses, the workers can organize, themselves and have, you still have experts and stuff, but instead of them having to be on scraps, they actually get a fair life out of it and they can actually control their own produce.
I don't necessarily like. I don't think that the workers would necessarily still produce uh, if there was no boss.
Why not?
Because why would they? If all their goods are just going to, go to be distributed based on need later, why would they do anything?
Well, they're included in the need as well. They benefit from it as well. And you're also ignoring the fact that we are automating more in society as well. So it's hardly as though they literally need thousands of people to do one job. We've got robots who can do it now.
Yeah,
But you talk about why are they going to do it for people's needs? Well, that doesn't really change the fact that they're being exploited right now. You go to one of those factories in Southeast Asia and tell them, oh well, don't you know that capitalism's lowered the amount of poverty, so really you're better off now when they're like living in like tiny living conditions, appalling working conditions, um, atrocious mental health issues and like depression because
yeah,
these people live horrible lives.
yeah. I think that's
Also,
true, but I also think that
also
like, well, first of all, our trade deals have kind of improved these places. They're certainly not well off at all, but these places have certainly improved from
are you kidding?
having our industry there.
I mean, that doesn't change the fact there's exploitation, and I would completely disagree with that point as well. But we've improved, like what we've Americanized it, or we've westernized it. But all it's done, it's not to make their lives better. It's to make us more profit. It's just imperialism. It's colonialism. It's the expansion of capitalism into other countries, erasing their culture and destroying their control of their produce to make more money. You can't tell me that the workers in those sweatshops are bettered for atrociously like managed shifts and stuff and awful
They
working
have
conditions.
atrocious conditions, but they're better off
That's not
than they were
true.
before. Like in China, like it was before they had a lot of industry, they had to do subsistence farming, and that was what we have in as a deal with China now is not good for the Chinese workers, but it's better than what came before it.
Well, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that China was a great place to live prior to market deregulation and stuff. But at the same time, that's not, subsistence farming is hardly, great, but neither is working in a sweatshop where you could lose your fingers or, get an illness from the complete terrible like toxic gases you're breathing in and stuff, and literally they put up nets to stop you throwing yourself off the building because they have such a terrible life and stuff. That, and also there's no reason for that to be happening. They could quite easily have fair lives, but it's the world around them, like you say, the existence of the West that is quite clearly
Yeah, we could
exploiting these
like
people.
improve
No, hold on a
the
second.
way that the
Hold on a
Chinese
second,
labor.
Hawk. Sorry to cut you off. It's just I hadn't finished my point. Um, you know, you're saying, oh, these trade deals are bad. Also, why do you think they're bad? Why do you think they exist in the way they do today? Because the capitalists want more money, as per capitalism, they want to accrue more capital and subsequently exploit these people, put up factories with atrocious working conditions, put people in shocking living conditions, cut corners wherever they can to make more money back here. That's how Apple can be such a wealthy company and produce so much, yet these workers are living on barely anything. That's why
But I think
you talk about let's talk about something else you said, like, oh, there's less poverty now. Well, that's really misleading, because it's fine, subsistence farming isn't great, especially when you're forced to do it, but we are judging that based on our own ideas about civilization. In fact that,
well, I don't think that most of the average Chinese workers would agree that they'd rather be subsistence farming on communes than working to than working in a factory with their own, where they earn their own money.
I mean, I don't know if you most of that money goes into paying rent, and little
Yeah, I
else.
know that.
They live on site, and even then, their living quarters are like prison-esque. They work all day. They get meals maybe, but hardly much. They've got no union rights, no striking rights. A lot of them can't talk, dissent about the corporation. The corporations, by the way, have private militias often on site to keep everyone in line, and all to make profit for the West. And yeah, sure, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that how things were before was great, but that doesn't change that the capitalist system is atrocious too. There's no
The
reason.
thing is, like, the capitalist system is making things better there. Like, you can look at graphs of like the increase in wages in China since like even just since they started opening up their markets, and the wages have increased dramatically, even continuing to now.
But that doesn't account for inflation, and it also doesn't account for the fact that these people are also having to spend more on rent and stuff, and living in said factory and stuff, and food and all those other things. And the wages are increasing, but nothing compared to the increase of the capitalist class, the wealthy. And the exploitation shouldn't be happening in the first place. What's the point in saying, oh, things have improved a bit, when you're not only attributing the produce of workers to capitalism, and then also ignoring the fact that the exploitation wouldn't exist in the first place if we just addressed the broken class system. And the fact that you can sit here and sort of say, oh, these factories existing in China is actually a better thing, because before it was quite bad too, is pretty atrocious, really. Like,
well, I'm also saying that, like, not only is it better, but it's been improving. Like, like if we continue to leverage our hold with China, we can absolutely improve the country as it's been trending to, with higher wages and such.
well, that's not really the case, though, is it? Because things getting better is not going to come at the same, in the same way as the accumulation of capital. The people, the capitalists who have imposed such terrible conditions in these factories, and not just in China, in numerous countries in Southeast Asia and really around the world, they do so because not because they're some cartoon villain, but because they want to make more money. They cut in these corners, makes them greater capital. That's capitalism. That's just accruing more capital. That's the system that is causing these things to happen in the first place. Because firstly, the produce of society is controlled by such an elite group of people, and secondly, the system is fundamentally about maintaining that and making more. So you can't address the issue if you're still going to keep the system that's caused the issue in the first place.
I don't think the system has caused the issue. That's
okay. Well, why are the factories such terrible places to work? And not just in China, but in any third world country, and even in some first world countries, to be honest. Hawk.
Yeah.
Why are these factories such horrible places to work? Why are there sweatshops and terrible factories across the globe, not just in the third world, in the first world too? Maybe not as bad, but still pretty bad. Why is this all happening?
All right, I'm back. Sorry, I had to be AFK for a second.
So did you not hear any of what I said?
I think I heard what you said. You said you were asking how. No, I think I'm just gonna need you to repeat it, just a little bit of it.
Essentially, why are these? You're saying, oh, it's not through the system, or it's not connected to the system. Well, why is it happening in the first place then? How do we get to a situation where we've got a factory full of people being treated abysmally?
Well, it's because the Chinese government refuses to treat its people humanely.
Well, it's the corporations, so because the corporation's one that owns a factory. And it's like I said, it's not just in China.
The Chinese government could mandate that they're treated humanely, and
well, firstly, that doesn't answer why they're being treated like that. And we'll come on to secondly in a second.
Well,
why
the government's refusal to do so is
I'm asking. Why is the factory doing it in the first place? Why is the corporation doing it in the first place?
Well, because they want to cheaper labor.
And why do they want cheaper labor?
Because then they can have cheaper goods.
And why do we want cheaper goods?
So that they can compete with compete with other companies and make more money, basically.
So they want to make more money.
Yeah, but
what's capitalism about?
Well, capitalism is about the desire for more money, definitely, and trying to acquire that money. But
so
I don't follow that. Like that's why I think that we should protect the workers. I don't think I do think that under a capitalist system we can have these regulations to prevent the exploitation that's happening in China.
But did you not hear what you just said? I asked you why these things are happening. You say they're to make more money, and you correctly said that capitalism is about accruing more capital, making more money, making yourself better and more powerful and stuff. So the system that is about making yourself better has resulted in people being abused and mistreated and exploited to make themselves better.
Yeah, that's why. I'll agree that under if there was no regulation, then a capitalist system would lead to quite a bit of exploitation. That's why I support capitalism with regulations. I wouldn't support it without any.
Indeed, Hawk. But you at the same time, you're not comprehending why these things in parts of the world are happening in the first place. And it's hardly as though regulations would be hard to implement. It's not hard to say, oh, don't make your workers work ridiculously long shifts. Why do you think it doesn't happen then? Why do you think we haven't got the common sense to put this in? And not just in China again. Well, so why do you think we don't have these regulations?
Well, that's because the governments are corrupt and paid off
Okay, and why are they corrupt and paid off?
because they want money too. But
Exactly. Yeah, you see the problem here, and also,
well, yeah,
why?
but I don't like. I think you can create governments that aren't corrupt under capitalist systems.
But the system is about making money. So how are you going to have a government that just somehow exists in a vacuum away from that? You know, the and also corporations. Why are capitalists not going to use their capital in the case of politics? Why are they not going to use their money to try and influence politics?
Well, because we should be regulating things
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
of course we should be, but that doesn't change that they're still going to try, and they're
Well, I mean, there are
succeeding. I
governments
mean,
that are not like corrupt in that way. I don't think a capitalist system needs to have a government that's
well,
easily corruptible,
I mean,
like in the United States.
less corrupt. I mean, firstly, the corruption happens because of said capitalism, but
Well, I think
secondly,
that I think
well,
there have been plenty
as
of governments that aren't capitalist that have been corrupt. Like the USSR was very corrupt, and other like non-capitalist
well,
governments are often
firstly,
even more corrupt. So
that's not the fact that other governments were corrupt doesn't mean that capitalism is not inherently corruptible. I mean, for one, even the governments that are less corrupt, like like you said, in Scandinavia and stuff, they still serve capital. They still protect private property. They still maintain the class system. They
I
still
don't
have
think
all the.
protecting private property or having a class system is corrupt, though.
Well, it is because there's no justification for said things existing. Um, you know the um, the idea that people should inherently just belong to a higher tier of people, the idea that people should control the produce of millions of workers individually, the idea that you can have people suffering without food or a home while people exist with thousands of land thousands of land thousands of acres of land and stuff, and massive amounts just needlessly wasted while people need it and don't get it. That isn't fair. That's not good, and that's becomes because society is set up to address said needs. um you know sorry, address said needs, address the capital of the wealthy. um it's ridiculous to ignore this, and subsequently look at listen to what you're saying, listen to what you've said. You recognize that corruption and stuff happens, deregulation happens, these atrocious working conditions happen because people want more money, people want to accumulate more. That's the system. That is literally the system. And subsequently, how can you then turn to me and say, "Oh, well, the system's actually good. We just need to take out one or two things." It's not. It's like saying, "Oh, I like cars, but don't drive a car to work." That don't.
No, I don't want to. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. I don't like. I think the capitalist system is very good at things like creating more products with at cheaper prices and giving people jobs and all that.
But that's not. That isn't. What do you mean creating more jobs and keep giving people produce?
Well, because like it creates competition in the markets. And
Why would there not be competition in a non-capitalist system?
because ultimately, if everyone ends up with about the same in the end, why would anyone want to go out and create something new? I guess.
Well, why do people just stop innovating? Do you not think that people would just stop having ideas and like creativity? And ironically, look at how much in under capitalism produce is controlled by a select group of people. For instance, look at film and media. In America, TV, for instance, is controlled massively by a handful of massive corporations. In fact, I think it's four control your entire television network. Um, Additionally, capitalists don't have any care for competition. They care about their own capital, and they will literally crush competition to maintain
Yeah,
their
that's why we
capital.
have antitrust regulations.
Yes, but they're not exactly very strong, are they? And they
Well, they're
only
not
end up
very strong
getting
in
better.
America, but there
Well,
are other
exactly.
countries that do it far better. Like even the European Union is like, even though they're a little too friendly to monopolies, they're going after Google right now, and
Yes, but they're only, like as we keep saying, or it's like as I keep saying, it's better, but it's not as good as it ought to be, and it's not good.
well, I
Um,
mean, I
people,
don't see
you're
what we can do that is necessarily better. Clearly, like, this is the best system we have.
that isn't the case, and you're not listening to what's, you're not listening to what's going on right now. You look at, you're talking about competition. Well, what competition is going to exist if a handful of people control so much? Who's going to have the grounds to fight a multi-billion company when no one has a million, let alone a billion? Um, and it's all right with just like media or something, or video games. What if it's like food? Look at how much produce Amazon has control over. I think it's 20% of what's it called, groceries and stuff. Like food produce is controlled by Amazon. Look at who controls the land. It's owned colossally by a handful of people, whilst the rest sort of have to um, sit in, on the streets, or in barely livable homes, or barely afford their rent. Um, we don't need that suffering to be happening. If we had a society controlled
These
by
are like
everyone,
problems that we can fix without just throwing away capitalism entirely, can't we?
how
Well,
how
you
are you
can
going? Okay, how are you going to guarantee everyone has a home?
you can have free or affordable housing programs, for example. Like you can take the market out of the areas of like necessities, like things like healthcare and housing, and those are the ones I can think of now.
Education and
Education as
stuff.
well.
Um,
Education as well. Yeah.
they're good ideas, but why are the capitalists, why are the wealthy going to agree to have less capital, less profit? Why are they going to just suddenly stop when it comes to those things? It's a free market, right? We've got a free ability to
Yeah,
accumulate
that's
profit
why we
however we
need the
like.
government to protect people in that scenario. Like, I
But
think I
as you
don't
say,
think like
as you've said, capitalism is, it corrupts people. People are gonna, want money and capital and stuff. Subsequently, why are they going to just suddenly ignore capital in the case of this one area you've decided is all right? Um, Capitalists don't care about where you see the limit, and yeah, I'm sure they were well aware, but it'd be fairer. Um, you know, um, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. It's great that we have these ideas, but capital is not just going to stop when you want it to. Um, you know, it's not. You're not gonna see. I mean, look what's happening now. We've already, despite the fact that we know all this stuff, we're seeing government actually remove the existing regulations on campaign laws, on housing, on education and stuff. Um, that's because capital matters more than the success and well-being of people in the country. Why are capitalists going to suddenly change their tune?
I don't think I don't think a government necessarily has to be corrupt and bend to the will of the capitalist system. I think
Well, of course, but that doesn't. They're going to be. Um, Capitalism isn't something you can just stop doing in a capitalist society. Like, they don't have to be corrupt, but capital is going to speak over that. And yeah, there's going to be people who say, no, I'm not going to accept your money. But sadly, everything is in this system, and elections are also subject to money and tiering. Look at how powerful lobbies are in many governments around the world. Look at how corporations have such a grapple of so much of politics. Why is that happening? Because of capital. Because people are, servants to the capital, to the continuous cycle of producing and making more and profit and stuff.
But like, I think that you can separate the government from the economic system. Like, you could, for instance, put in place bans on like former politicians going into lobbying and such, and you could ban corporate donations to campaigns.
And how are you going to how would that go through Parliament in the first place? How would it not be subject to change
through elections? If the people want that, then the people can vote for it, and that's kind of what's happening. Like, you see a lot of these rising star politicians in America are very anti corruption and anti super PAC and all of that.
Oh, of course, no, and it's great. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's bad to raise these things. Of course not. But ultimately, said change is not only impeded by the system around us, because look at how, despite people being anti-corruption, supposedly America especially has such massive, corruption issues and corporate lobbying.
Well, I think part of that is the two-party system, but that
exactly.
be...
And why does that exist? Why do we have two parties essentially with any realistic chance, and not
because our voting system is pretty corrupt. Our voting system leads to the first past the post. It leads to just a situation where there's only really two viable parties. Otherwise, you're splitting your vote. You lead to a spoiler effect.
Yeah, and why is the system so bad? Because it's hardly as though like people just didn't know how to make a good voting system. Because we've had for years intelligent academic people who can design working electoral systems. So why is it okay?
Because the people haven't supported it. In some cases, we're starting to have a more fair election system. I think in Maine they've made it so that they're going to be the first state to implement a ranked choice voting system. So, it is improving in a lot of places. And I think what?
Sorry, I didn't catch what you said. Did you say mandatory?
No, I think Maine is putting in ranked choice voting.
Okay, well, obviously that's an improvement. But Maine is one state and also not a very big state, I believe. I think it's one of the smaller ones in terms of electoral college.
Only 3 electoral votes, but
exactly,
the point is that
it's very slow, isn't
it? It's a very slow process to get progress, but these ideas like abolishing the electoral college, for one, are sort of things that have become more and more popular over time. Like the ranked choice voting, that started in Maine, but it can start to expand out from there when people see how successful it is.
Of course, but that doesn't change that it's firstly slow, secondly not always wanted by those in charge, and thirdly going to be opposed quite strongly. Imagine trying to pass that in several red states in the South, where despite the fact that there's actually quite a lot of people who don't vote Republican, there's no translation of that into actual points and stuff. Let's look at the complete lack of democracy in America and whether better voting in one state, a particularly small state at that, is going to represent actual change in the grand scale. And also, it's all very well, saying, "Oh, there's just time." There's time for it to grow, but is there time? Is there time for us to just continuously wait?
Oh, I don't think I'm not one for supporting radical changes at once to vastly improve society. I'm one for a sort of incrementalist approach, I think. So,
That's not good enough. We're
well,
on a world
I
that's
don't
dying.
think that we can. I don't think that an extreme change is necessarily viable. I think we should be improving over time the standards of living.
Well, we could quite easily improve things if we moved out of this system. If we said, well, no, we're not going to tolerate homelessness and world hunger in a world with enough homes and enough food for everyone. We're not going to tolerate people having to, miss out on healthcare and meals so that they can pay their rent. We're going to say, no, society should be controlled and owned by the workers. Produce should be controlled and owned by the workers. Society
But
should
how are we
operate
gonna
for the better.
let that happen? How is that?
Oh, it was,
How
I'm
do
not
you
saying
make
it's going to
that
be easy.
work?
It's going to take a serious fundamental change to society, or, maybe even revolution. Having said that, that doesn't mean we shouldn't aim for it, but we first need to recognize that the system as a whole is broken. And like you said, social democracy is obviously still capitalist, but is still better than what we have at the moment. And the quite right wing, fairly deregulated capitalism we have at the moment. And obviously change can come, but we have to ultimately progress as a whole. We have to progress from the system, not just for our sake, but for the planet's sake as a whole. Because it's all very well talking about capitalism like this, but if we don't change something, the planet's done. Because we're what we had this summer, we're having the hottest summers ever recorded. Like it's we can't deny that climate change and a whole host of other issues are ruining our planet. We've got to change something, otherwise we're in a pretty horrific situation.
I think that I don't know if I can agree though that a radical change is necessary or really viable. I think we can slowly change society over time to conform to sort of the standards that we need to live in a modern society.
I don't know what you mean. Why would what are you?
I'm trying to say, I guess, that I favor an incrementalist approach because I don't think that we necessarily can extremely change society all at once.
Why not?
Well, I don't think that I don't think that it's just work. I guess I don't know how to explain what I'm trying to say.
I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and obviously, change can be slow, but at the same time, if you imagine two gradients, one of incremental change would be like barely sort of sluggishly going upwards, and the other one's like nearly a vertical line, where and eventually that second line is going to overtake the first one. We can't um, just plod along when we don't have the have the world to do that. And there's also so much needless suffering and so much lost potential that we could have if every single human on the planet was provided for and given their basic human rights. Incremental change isn't good enough when people are dying quite needlessly because of our atrocious distribution of resources. And it would not be hard to address this if we had a worker owned society. and that's not going to be an abandonment of societal values or make people just turn into rabid animals. It's all it's going to do is change our distribution system. It's going to free people from having to pay rent, having to give up their time at force to the capitalist class, to sell their labor for the capitalist profit off when they're not even getting a fair deal out of it. Progress can come if we believe it can come, and if we fight for it.
I think I don't necessarily think that a capitalist system has to be unfair, I guess.
Well, I mean, you said earlier that it was a good thing that people were working in sweatshops.
No, I didn't say it's a
Oh,
good thing.
sorry,
I
a
said
good
it's,
thing compared to what they had before.
well, yeah, it's better. It's not good,
Well,
though.
is it? In many of these countries, things were actually better before. Um, said sweatshops were put in place.
I don't think that's true.
I think it was. I mean, sure, it might not have had the same technology, but they were happier. They were, had their own culture and were happy to, just exist. Yeah, sure, not the best lives, but still a working group of people, a happy group of people. And then they had their culture erased by colonialist settlers. Look at, for instance, the sheer amount of blood on the hands of Western empires, like British Empire, for instance. Its reach spread across the entire globe. Many a culture was exterminated by exterminated. That's a gross word to use. Were destroyed by the colonial powers.
Yeah, and I
Ultimately,
don't like support the imperialism or
but
anything
it
like
doesn't matter
that.
that you don't support it because that's what capitalism is. That's what the
I
capital
don't
was.
think that's just what capitalism is.
Well, it is though, because they commodified the cultures of the world, the regions of the world for their own benefits, turned it into their commodity, profited off it, and subsequently our nations are colossally wealthier than the rest of the world. Thanks to the exploitation of the globe. Um, that's what capitalism is. Ultimately, it's just the commodity doesn't matter that it's an inhumane thing to do to exploit the world. Um, it's just a way of
I
making money.
well, I don't think that capitalist systems are the only ones that are responsible for colonialism or anything like that. Like Blue Republic in the chat, they pointed out that the U.S. that the USSR they invaded Afghanistan, and that was a colonialist action, and like capitalist systems aren't the only ones that have colonialism happen. And
Well, that's very true. But having said that, firstly, that doesn't address the fact that capitalism does have this inherent link, and secondly, let's observe the USSR. Um, what was the USSR? What was the tiering system? Was their class? The class system that existed in the USSR quite clearly had a political tiering in said society. It clearly had a group of people controlling the resources and wealth of the country. It clearly had the authoritarian force behind the workers being forced into doing said roles. It wasn't something that was identical to the capitalist countries around it, but it still uses the same framework. And when we talk about capitalism, we describe that class system, that framework of society. We describe the force of a small group of people onto the rest of society. Um, you know, we need to recognize that that force does not need to exist. It does not. We do not need this class system where people are, lost to the whims and wants of a handful of people, but one in which everyone can prosper with the resources of the world.
well, I think like, I think first of all, he kind of said that you're kind of implying that like the USSR was capitalist to some extent. Is that what you're trying to say, or?
Well, I mean, it had many of the same themes, doesn't it? Because it's got
It was a socialist system, though.
what was it? Was it worker owned?
So
Was it
it
worker
was a
owned?
type of. We're going to go down the not real socialism route.
Well, there's only one type of socialism, and that socialism has to be worker owned. That's the whole point. It's about the abolishment of class and the control of society by the workers. So if it's not worker owned, then it's not socialist. So was the USSR worker owned?
I'm not going to go down the not real socialism route.
Well, you don't hear what I just said. What is socialism is worker ownership of the means of production. It's essentially the abolishment of the class system that forces workers into becoming the tools of the capitalists and allows for society to be, controlled by everyone who lives in it. Have freedom from the chains of class. Now, the USSR was an authoritarian state with a dictator. Workers had no control, and things were controlled by a private group of politicians at the top of society, benefiting of everyone else's produce. So, can that be described as socialist?
Are any of these like communist nations that have revolutions? Are any of them socialist? I guess.
Well, the idea that a nation is socialist as a whole is a little bit flawed and wrong.
You don't think that a nation can exist that is socialist?
Well, the ideas of it being worker owned are to remove said barriers of national states and stuff. But regardless, come back to the point, you can't describe a country that is not worker owned as socialist. That's just a basic political fact. So to imply that this country is bad somehow is a reflection on socialism is wrong, and also ignores the fact that the system right now, capitalism, is atrocious and responsible for a lot of wrong in the world, needless wrong that would not be happening if we moved away from this capitalist system.
But I don't think that like the problems with the capitalist system are things that have to exist, or if without getting rid of the capitalist system. I think we can, improve our society without removing the capitalist system.
You don't think it's possible to remove remove capitalism without removing society?
And I don't. I think it's possible to improve our society without removing capitalism. Is what I'm saying.
You think it's sorry? So you think you want? Sorry, say what you said again. I lost what you were saying.
I think that we can improve our society without removing capitalism. I don't think a lot of the flaws you've pointed out are inherent to just any capitalist system. I think we can remove those flaws within the capitalist system and keep it.
I mean, I agree that we can improve society without removing capitalism, but that doesn't change that there's a problem existed because of capitalism, because of the same, things within capitalism, the same themes of power and of concentrated power and stuff. That we have to ask ourselves why these things exist and how we are going to fix things within this system.
We can fix them through our votes. That's the point of democracy.
Our votes in deeply flawed and broken systems.
Our voting system is deeply flawed, but we can also, improve that. There's our system is very corrupt in terms of our voting system, but that can still be improved and overcome through voting. You just need more votes.
Improved through said voting system which is
Yeah, you
corrupt.
have to reform the system from the inside, but
And how are you going to do that when, as we've already established, capital, dominates the conversation and maintains such a presence?
well, because ultimately, if there's enough fervor among the public, no amount of capital can overcome that.
If there's enough what,
When
sorry?
it comes to voting, so
Well, the vote, like, as we've already established, voting is heavily gerrymandered. But
yeah,
it's
it's
not.
heavily gerrymandered, but none. But like, if we get enough people on this side, like that can't be overcome by capital or gerrymandering or any of that.
Oh, of course, but not only do you need all those people voting and the gerrymandering to be overcome, you also need to have the candidates running who would oppose that in the first place. You know, look at how many
Well,
Democrats.
anyone's allowed to run for office in the
Oh,
United
indeed, but
States.
but to be, yeah, but you have to, firstly, there's only two parties that have any realistic chance of winning an election or winning a seat, really. Maybe there's a few local parties and a few um, regional third party options with a bit of a shout. But for real systemic change within said system, it has to come through one of those parties. Um, and subsequently, um, those parties um, have a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of corruption within said parties.
But even
Yeah,
so, like, you don't have to be a part of a party. Like, if there's like independents can win, even though the deck is heavily stacked against them, and even so, you can also reform the parties from the inside. There was been a lot of buzz about like the our revolution type thing with social democrats winning all over the country, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez winning her primary.
Mm. However, she is one example. Um, Also, not a not an anti-capitalist, but a social democrat who still
Well, yeah,
advocates for
she's
many
a
of the
social
things that.
democrat, but she doesn't, or she thinks she's a socialist, but she's a social democrat. Yeah.
Um, she still advocates for many of the things that um, support capitalist society, but
Well, yeah, I
also is.
support social democracy though, so that's why I'm not too worried about
Oh, of course, but
social democrats winning. So. But I'm just
society.
saying that like like you can win a primary if the base of the party supports you. So
It's one region though, and even with all those people, they're still I mean, for instance, look at how Hillary Clinton and people like her in the Democrats still have such power in there. Look at how many Democrats refuse to even move slightly away from the corporate environment that has dominated American politics. Look
and
at.
I don't think Hillary Clinton was some kind of corporatist at all.
Well, I mean, if you look at her history as a person, um,
Well, I mean,
have you seen what she
her
did in
campaign
Honduras
website,
or
like
around
her,
the world?
if you read her policies that she actually supported, they're fairly progressive. Like they're even more left wing than what Obama was proposing.
Well, Obama was hardly left wing at all, though. And secondly,
Well,
Obama
I
wasn't
think Obama was actually pretty left wing, but
maybe on an
even so,
American
like,
scale, but that's not really saying anything. And he was still a neoliberal who, had a pretty poor international record in regards to many of his actions.
yeah,
Um,
I disagree with all of that.
well, I mean, that's another interesting thing to come on to, actually.
But on the topic, like you said, like you're talking about like Hillary Clinton being like a neoliberal. Her campaign platform was pretty progressive. Like she supported overturning Citizens United. She supported a constitutional amendment to get money out of politics, and like,
That's not, yes, but anyone can just say, "Oh, I want to get money out of politics." It's a
well,
neat slogan.
she pledged in her first 30 days to introduce a constitutional amendment. And like that probably would have failed that's in the House or Senate, but even so, that's very progressive, and it's not like some neoliberal plan or anything.
anyone can say something before they're in office to lie. I mean, you only have to look at Trump to sort of see that. I'm not going to equate the two, but that doesn't change that Hillary Clinton is fundamentally a pro-corporate person. Look at her
No,
history. Yes, she is literally endorsed by like the CEOs of like Walmart and many other corporations that don't come to mind, sadly, at the moment. Her foreign policies resulted in sweatshops across many Honduras, for instance. Honduras had their government overthrown by a Hillary Clinton backed coup. While she was Secretary of State, I think, for Obama, which she pushed for. And subsequently, the deal made corporations a massive amount of money. You know, the capitalists got wealthier at the expense of the freedom and liberty of the workers in said country. That's what her and many other Democrats are like, and that's the ultimate choice for many of these people. Subsequently, to suggest that you can just fix the inherent problems with this capitalist system by just voting them away isn't going to happen when the system is fundamentally
but they
set
can be
up.
voted away. Like there's nothing
But they
stopping
can't,
the
though.
people from voting away a lot of the problems in our current system.
How are you going to vote for people to change the what's it called to end labor exploitation?
Well, you can vote for candidates who support your same policy goals in that regard.
And what if there aren't? Like in many cases.
Then you can run on your own, and you can try and get success that way. You could try and primary in terms of within the party, or you can try and run as an independent. But like ultimately, if there's enough of a fervor from the people, then they'll get what they want because they'll elect the people that agree with them.
Yeah, but how are you going to get the word out and compete with people who've got like several thousand times the funding of you?
Well, you can, there's a lot of grassroots campaigning that you can do, like Bernie Sanders, who I have quite a lot of issues with. He ran a very grassroots campaign with very little money, and he didn't fall too far behind Clinton. So.
Well, Sanders is actually quite a good example of the corporate structuring of many of these parties.
No.
Yes.
No.
I mean, quite clearly.
The primary was not rigged against Bernie Sanders. He got less votes, and he didn't become the nominee for that reason.
Do you think it's fair that a handful of superdelegates get to choose primarily?
The superdelegates chose, as they always do, the superdelegates chose the person who got the most votes. The only thing the superdelegates are there for is in the case of an emergency where like something really bad comes out about the candidate after the primaries that wasn't before known, and like otherwise the superdelegates just vote for whoever got the most votes.
Well, again, is that second tiering of political choice fair? I mean, the voting of people between Clinton.
If Bernie got more votes, then the superdelegates would have voted for him. They're only there as like a fail-safe in case something horrible happens. But
you cut me off. The vote split between Clinton and Sanders was a lot closer. Do you think it's quite revealing that a lot of people didn't vote at all for the Democrats in the actual election, and B, Sanders, despite being massively popular, was ultimately dropped? But coming back to the main point I was making, like you said, run as an independent. Clinton had a massive campaign fund, which she nearly lost to Sanders, but she ultimately still won.
Because she got the most votes.
Yeah, and why was that? How is Sanders?
Because more people wanted her as the Democratic nominee than Bernie Sanders.
More people voted, but lots of people don't vote in those things. Lots of people don't
And
know
those
they
people
even
don't
have.
count because they didn't vote.
And why
They've
didn't
made
they
it clear
vote?
that they don't care.
That isn't true. There are plenty of people who really care.
No, not
But
voting is not some kind of like message. Not voting is
what if
showing
you
that you
can't?
don't care.
Okay. What if you're working and you can't get in to
Well, fair
vote?
enough. I guess there are
Well, then that's not. There
extenuating
you go.
circumstances then.
Fair enough. How many people do you think are in jobs on voting day and can't actually physically go and vote because they'll lose their job?
Okay, fair enough. That there are extenuating
So
circumstances that can prevent someone from
that's
voting. I'm just
one big
talking
thing.
about the people who didn't vote intentionally, but
All right. That's one major point. That's a massive part of how lots of people, who would vote for things that would change their conditions, can't actually access their votes. Um,
yeah,
another
again,
thing,
that's something you
look
have
at
to change with
yeah, but
legislation.
it's and yet another problem caused by the system trying to maintain their capital, where you've got democracy, but you've got a democracy that exists to, sort of change things not enough to actually affect the capital. Um, let's talk about felony and how felons can't vote whatsoever. How many of them were, literally um, in a system in which the what's it called? They've essentially been locked away because normally they're in poverty, did something like stealing a loaf of bread to try and like eat, ended up getting put in prison, can't vote anymore.
Okay,
They've lost their vote completely. They might have
couple
voted.
things. I first of all, apparently it's illegal to fire somebody for taking off of work to go vote. So
Lots of
I
things
guess
are.
the people who had to work could go and vote for
How
during that time.
they haven't been. They haven't forcibly been refrained from voting. They've they could go and vote, but then they'd lose their job and their income. And
Well, you can't. You're not allowed to fire people for going to vote.
well, there's a lot of things you're not allowed to do. But corporations still get away with them. Remember, the corporation is a much wealthier entity existing at the at the interest of capital, and worker is in a exploitative um, the worker is an exploited party here. They're not able to just quit to go and vote. And yeah, of course, people do have time on voting day, but the window is extremely small. It's made deliberately harder to vote. Information is not distributed fairly. There are many attempts by officials to stop people from actually voting. And yeah, in theory, people have the right to vote, and in theory, people can just go and vote. But in practice, there are a lot of barriers to that.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, I
fine,
think
you
there's a lot
could.
of things that we could do to stop that. We can make voting day a federal holiday that you have to get off work for. We could make voting day a weekend so that most people are off that day. We could do a lot of things to improve, the way our electoral system works. But I don't think that's, and I think that's viable. But I don't think that those people not being able to vote is necessarily, you know, dispositive of why why Bernie should have won, I guess. But
Um, sorry, could you repeat what you said? I missed a little bit of that.
well, I guess I don't think that like many people. I think I agree that many people not being allowed to vote is an issue, and I think we could improve that. But I ultimately like I don't think people not being able to vote can be in. I don't think we can give those people the like one candidate and say, well, they probably would have voted for this person. Or,
Well, the reason I brought them up is to highlight the fact that many of the people who would vote for a changed, a person who would bring about change, can't vote for them because they had their right taken away. Um, because the capitalist system does not care for anything but preserving their own capital, but making them more capital. And subsequently, people having their right to vote taken away from them is just another means to making more profit ultimately, because it prevents people who would otherwise vote for more left-leaning people. Prevents them from getting the access to vote. Ultimately, all
And
these
I
points I
agree,
make
should help give them access to the vote.
But why does it happen
arguing that.
Why does it happen in the first place, therefore? That's the connection you're not seeing. That's you got to look at why things happen.
Because of policymakers that don't want those types of people to vote.
And why don't they want them to vote?
Because they're afraid of the way they'll vote. So.
And why are they afraid of the way they'll vote?
Because they'll vote them out.
And why don't they want to be voted out?
Because they want to stay in power.
And why do they want power?
It's a good job, I guess.
And what makes it a good job?
Well, it's pays well. It's it you get to make the decisions. It's
you get to make decisions, and it's a good job because what do you get from having power and influence and control?
Well,
you get
in America you get money because of all the super PACs and all that can make our politicians rich. Although, if we actually had a fair system, you wouldn't make that much. You wouldn't make as much extreme amounts of money from it. But
I mean, I just find it staggering how you can ignore how the system works ultimately and why things happen, really. And you aren't someone who is ignorant of the problems that exist in society. Think about why things happen and attribute it to the system. Attribute it to the system around us that cause these things.
But I don't think it's
people have their right to vote stripped from them to preserve the power of the people in charge, who also can be wealthy, backed by corporations, and make more money this way. That's the system. That's capitalism, and we have to change that because it's a disgrace. People lose the right to vote based on essentially nothing.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I just don't think that's necessarily the fault of like the capitalist system. I think that you can. I think like a lot of these things you can legislate to protect the rights of these people.
We are going around in circles here because as I've already just said, legislative change comes through the same voting system that we are already seeing people lose access to and have the conditions made much harder.
Yeah, and I think we should open those up. But I don't think there's any alternative to getting the people who can vote to vote for the candidates you like, because there's no a revolution is certainly not viable in today's society. But
why isn't it viable?
Because the United States has tactical nukes, and the United States has tanks, and the populace does not have tanks or nukes or anything.
Why is it only going to take place in America?
What?
Why is it only taking place in America?
Why is what only taking place in America?
Revolution.
I don't think it's only taking place in America. What do you mean?
Like you said, you said I don't think it could happen. I don't think a revolution could happen. and you're talking about how the US has tanks and guns and stuff. Why is it only America you're considering? There are billions of workers around the world.
Well, sure, I'm sure in like less developed nations, maybe a revolution is possible, but I'm talking more specifically about developed nations that have the sort of heavy artillery um, could that could pretty much quash a revolution
Who
from the start.
builds who builds the tanks and guns and bullets?
Well, the, they have like researchers and such who well we buy them from defense contractors who have them produced through different through various different means. I think like like we have the weapons produced in a factory, I guess, but
Yep. And who builds them? Because they didn't just like grow out of the ground, do they? Who builds the gun and the tank and the bullets?
well, the people, I don't think people are going to be able to like build like a nuclear weapon or something if even if they had access to these factories.
Well, no. What I'm saying is though that the worker is going to be the one producing the weapons and stuff of the army. Um,
Well, we already have a lot of the weapons that like we need to quash any sort of revolution.
sorry.
We already have like the government already has all the weapons they need to quash any sort of revolution.
Well, again, the people who produce said the guns and stuff are workers, people in control of these guns. Yeah, fine. The army has a lot of them, but lots of people are not going to just stand by the government. And yeah, I'm not going to saying it's going to be easy, but um, at the same time, workers are the ones producing these things, and ultimately, without said workers, society cannot function. So if workers were, able to revolt, social progress could come. Um, Now, I'm actually getting quite tired because it's quite late in the UK. And I've noticed a fair few, um, what's it called, comments saying we should talk about foreign policy. So we will do that next time if we have another stream.
Yeah.
And I will call it to an end here. Do you want to say anything else before we go?
No, I don't think I have. I don't think I have anything to complete this with. I guess.
Okay. Well, what I would say is that you've got a lot of good ideas, and I agree with what a lot of what you say about how we should be regulating and we should be trying to change things, um, and we should be trying to make the world a fairer place. But ultimately, we need to improve society more than what is happening at the moment, and
Well, yeah, I
address
agree that we have to. I agree that we have to improve society.
yeah, but a lot more than what we're doing at the moment. We need to have a world where people are not dying, dying, and starving, and living without healthcare and having to be on the streets. In a world where we have so much in resource, we need a world where society is not controlled by the top band of people who have so much from the produce of everyone else. We need to end the exploitation of the worker, the imperialism and colonialism that we see around the globe. And we aren't going to do that under a system that fundamentally uses all those things to make profit and capital. And ultimately, your criticism of society has to incorporate anti-capitalism. Otherwise, what good has it achieved? But anyway, if you wanted to say anything in response to that, you can.
No, I think we can leave it at that, I suppose.
Okay. Thanks everyone for watching. Apart from the few people in the chat who were posting utter shite about how. Yeah, I have to talk to this Blue Republic person another time.
Yeah, he follows me on Twitter, and I talk to him sometimes. He's pretty reasonable.
We'll see about that. Anyway, thanks everyone for watching, and thank you, Hawk, for joining me. Adieu.